Ever imagine, like, looking up, and instead of fireworks, it's missiles? That's what happened in Israel, and it's a huge deal for how Israel and Iran get along. You sent this YouTube video by Drew Rafi about it. Really interesting. Want to unpack it together?
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot to process, going beyond just the news headlines. We look at the history, who's involved, what it means going forward.
Right into it then. Rafi really lays out this October 1st attack. He says Iran launched over 108 get this, ballistic missiles, not just rockets, aimed all over Israel. Not just military stuff either. The Mossad, their intelligence was targeted, going right for the core of their security.
Exactly. And ballistic missiles, that's important. We need to understand the Mossad, that's their version of the CIA. Not just showing off firepower. It was to stop Israel figuring out threats, countering them.
Okay, so crippling them. But what is the difference, missile versus rocket? Both sound bad to me.
Technology. Ballistic missiles are like next level, long range, crazy fast, and scariest part, they're precise. Hundreds of miles, hit a car-sized target, changes the whole game.
Pinpoint. Yikes. Easy to focus on the gear, but Rafi shows the human cost too. Those pictures, the aftermath, brutal. This isn't theoretical, it's people stuck in the middle.
Absolutely. And that cost, it goes beyond the immediate. He talks about Israel's defense, the Iron Dome, each missile they shoot down. Millions of dollars each time.
Millions per interception. Even with fancy tech, that's got to strain them.
Exactly. And this is where it affects everyone, not just Israel. That money pressure impacts who they work with, trade deals, even global aid. The whole world feels ripples from this.
Hitting our wallets too, potentially. And this isn't new, right? Rafi talks about alliances, rivalries going back decades. This proxy thing he mentions, gotta ask, what does that even mean?
So groups like Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, even the Houthis in Yemen, Rafi's saying they're central to this, even if not Iran directly. Each group has its own goals, its history with Israel, not a simple two-sided thing at all.
So not Iran, but involved. Kind of like they're calling the shots secretly.
It's called a proxy war, where a nation, here it's Iran, they fight indirectly. Weapons, money, training, intel, you name it. It makes finding peace so much harder.
Like a web, touch one part. And then events Rafi describes, Hamas leader assassinated in Iran, Hezbollah targeted, recipe for disaster.
Like throwing gasoline on a fire, those were. Not random, meant to escalate. And to get why this is so big, we got to look at each group's history.
So we've got Iran, Israel, this whole proxy thing, pressure cooker is the right word. How do we even untangle this and the world's reaction to all this lately?
You said it. Untangling this is the question. Global reaction. Rafi points out it's all over the place. The UN and such, they're condemning it, want de-escalation. But then there's big players like India. They're saying talk, diplomacy, but not picking sides.
He really gets into that. Why some countries hesitate. Is it money stuff, scared of retaliation? What shows this isn't just their problem? The whole world's trying to not get burned?
And that's where understanding how countries work, it's vital. India, for example, they've always been non-aligned. Means staying out of fights that aren't theirs directly. They have to balance their own safety, money, and who they're friendly with. It's complicated stuff, seeing how this plays out globally.
Makes sense, but kind of overwhelming too. Deep conflicts, serious weapons, blame going everywhere. Any hope at all for peace here?
Well, remember those isolated incidents we talked about? Assassinating that Hamas leader. It's bigger than one guy. Hamas has been huge in this for decades. Israel, the West, they call them terrorists. But they're a political force too in the Palestinian territories, lots of support. Their whole thing is tied up with the Israel-Palestine conflict, adding another layer to all this.
Every time you think you're getting a grip, there's another layer. So Hamas in Gaza, bordering Israel. What about Hezbollah, way up in Lebanon, right?
Right. And Hezbollah's past matters too. They came about in the 80s, Lebanese civil war, with help from Iran, fighting Israel being in southern Lebanon. A lot of countries call them terrorists, but they're strong in Lebanon, even in their government. They say they're resisting Israel, which a lot of people believe, especially those who think Israel is occupying them. Their whole thing is Shia Islam, and they've got this complicated relationship with Iran, which is mostly Shia too.
Easy to throw around terrorist. I'm not saying violence is okay, but for them, they're freedom fighters, resisting what they see as oppression. Rafi says, we have to get the history, the anger driving this, before even talking about solutions.
Exactly. And that's where it gets messy. All the history here, the wars, the peace attempts that went nowhere, this isn't new, and it's not simple.
And speaking of not simple, those Houthi rebels Rafi mentioned in Yemen, whole other mess miles away. How'd they get mixed up in this?
Great question. Shows how connected everything is. Houthis, they're Shia Muslims fighting in Yemen for years now. They've got their own reasons, but Iran's been helping them too, making their civil war even worse. Rathi uses them to show Iran's influence is big, and this could destabilize the whole area.
So we have historical anger, proxy wars. Everyone wants something different. Any good news at all?
Rathi says, even when it's this bad, gotta remember the human cost. The stories he tells, families ripped apart, people dying, places destroyed. He quotes Gandhi, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Really makes you think. We need a different way, but if it's always retaliation, how do you even start?
That's what it comes down to. Rathi doesn't have easy answers. Nobody does, really. But he points out the good stuff happening. Peace movements in Israel and Iran. Everyday people, sick of war, taking huge risks to connect, understand each other.
That's pretty inspiring, even when it seems impossible. But what about the ones with power? The governments, the leaders? They're showing any signs of wanting peace talks.
And that's where things get really interesting.
So, the history, the proxies, the human cost. Where do we go from here? You mentioned Rathi sees some hope. What's that about? Governments open to actual peace talks. Ever.
Well, he's honest about it. Right now, both Israel and Iran, their leaders, they benefit from this whole enemy thing. Elections, controlling how people see things.
Yeah.
Easier to unite against something than talk about giving stuff up for peace.
Kind of cynical, but yeah, happens a lot.
True. But here's the hopeful part. Rathi says behind the scenes, there are things happening. Diplomacy, but hush-hush. Not public, so they can talk without the whole world watching.
Secret peace talks, basically.
Exactly. And they're fragile, hit roadblocks, but the fact they exist means something.
Yeah.
And it's not just governments. He mentions NGOs, those international groups, working to get people talking, understanding, setting the stage, hopefully.
That's good, but if it's also secretive, what needs to happen for peace to actually have a shot, according to Rathi?
He says the biggest problem is, well, they don't trust each other. History of bad blood, both sides hurting. Building trust, even tiny bits, that's key, like exchanging prisoners or even just agreeing to meet, no demands beforehand.
Baby steps, huh? Sounds naive, but I guess you gotta start somewhere.
Right. Might not seem like much, but Rathi's point is it creates the space for talking, for diplomacy. But it'll take a lot of patience, guts, and for the leaders to actually want it, to get past all that anger.
What gets me is we talk about this like it's just going to happen, like we're watching a movie. But Rathi reminds us these are people making choices, doing things. Change is possible, even when it seems like it's not.
That's what he wants us to remember. He says we all have a role. Even if it's just learning about this stuff, supporting the groups trying for peace, or having tough conversations, but doing it respectfully.
So it's a call to action then. Just because it's far away doesn't mean we're not connected. The more we get it, the better chance we have at making a better world.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like Rathi says, an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. We choose. Violence or working towards peace, where it's not just about weapons.
Powerful stuff. Thank you for breaking this all down. Everyone listening, this is just the start. Keep learning, keep asking questions, keep talking to each other. That's how we make things better.